Nobody mentioned the 18 years. Nobody in that room said a single word about the accounts I'd saved, the deals I'd pulled back from the edge, or the Saturday mornings I spent at my desk while my son was at his baseball games wondering why his dad wasn't in the bleachers. I sat across from my boss, a man I'd helped build from a regional freight company into a 9-figure logistics operation, and watched him slide a manila folder across the conference table like he was passing me a lunch menu. "We're going in a different direction," he said. That was it. 18 years. One folder. One sentence. His name was Harlan. Harlan Beckett. 62 years old, silver cufflinks. A handshake firm enough to make you feel like you just closed a deal even when you were losing one. I'd known him since he ran operations out of a converted warehouse in Columbus with 12 employees and 2 leased trucks. I was employee number 4. I built the systems that got us to 400. His son-in-law was sitting to his left. I want to be clear about something. I didn't dislike the young man personally. Zane was 28, had an MBA from a school his father-in-law had donated a building to, and spoke with the kind of calm confidence that only comes from never having been truly wrong about anything important yet. He had good hair, he smiled a lot, and 3 weeks earlier, Harlan had announced, in a company-wide email I found out about the same time everyone else did, that Zane would be stepping into the newly created role of Chief Operations Strategist, reporting directly to the CEO. I was the Chief Operations Officer. Nobody explained what the difference was supposed to be. I didn't ask. I watched. That was always my approach. I'd learned in the early years that the people who react loudest in the moment almost always lose. You learn more by going quiet and paying attention than you ever do by putting your cards on the table. So I watched Zane sit in on my meetings. I watched him take notes, sometimes on his phone, which he didn't try to hide. I watched him ask questions that revealed he didn't yet understand that our Midwest distribution contracts were renewed on a staggered calendar, that our carrier relationships in the Southeast were held together by phone calls I made personally once a quarter, or that the software platform I'd built for route optimization over the past 4 years was licensed not to the company, but to me. That last part mattered more than anyone in that conference room understood. When Harlan pushed the folder across the table, I opened it. Separation agreement, 12 weeks severance, non-disparagement clause, effective immediately. I read the whole thing without speaking. There was a pen already sitting on top of the folder. Someone had thought ahead. I looked up at Harlan. "I'll need a few days to review this with my attorney." He looked surprised. Most people, I think he expected, would either fall apart or sign immediately just to end the discomfort. I was neither type. I picked up the folder, stood up, thanked him for the opportunity, and walked out. I drove home, sat in my driveway for maybe 20 minutes. My wife came out eventually. She'd seen my truck pull in and known something was wrong because I never came home at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I told her what happened. She didn't say much right away. She's not the type to rush to fill silence. She just reached over and put her hand on mine and said, "Okay, what do you need to do first?" That's the thing about 18 years of hard choices, you find out who's actually with you. My wife had watched me miss dinners and school plays and a vacation we'd planned for 3 years and finally canceled. She never stopped being with me, and somewhere in that driveway sitting in my truck at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, I made myself a quiet promise that whatever happened next, I wasn't going to let this break what we had. I called my attorney the next morning. His name was Fletcher, an old friend from my community college days who'd gone on to law school and built a practice in employment and contract law. We'd stayed in touch mostly through annual Christmas cards and an occasional lunch. He was the kind of lawyer who read everything twice before he said anything once. I sent him my original employment contract, my most recent compensation agreement, and the separation paperwork Harlan had given me. I also sent him something Harlan had probably forgotten existed, the licensing agreement I'd insisted on when I first built the route optimization platform. I'd built that system on my own time using my own equipment before formally proposing it to the company. When I brought it to Harlan in 2019, I told him I'd integrate it fully into our operations, but that the underlying architecture remained mine. At the time, Harlan had laughed it off as paranoid and agreed without much thought. His general counsel had reviewed it, made a few edits, and both sides signed. The license was renewable annually. The renewal was tied to my continued employment. Fletcher called me back the following afternoon. He said, and I remember this clearly, they didn't read what they signed. I told him I wasn't sure what I wanted to do yet. I just wanted to understand where I stood. You're standing on solid ground, he said. I did not sign the separation agreement. I spent the next few weeks doing something nobody expected, nothing obvious. I had some savings. My wife was working. We weren't comfortable, but we weren't desperate, and desperation is what people count on when they push you out. They want you to grab the severance and go quiet because you need the money and you're afraid of the fight. I wasn't afraid, and I'd been careful with money for a long time. Meanwhile, I started getting texts from former colleagues, people I'd worked with for years. The first few were just check-ins, heard what happened, that's wrong, hang in there. But by the third week, the texts started changing. One from a dispatcher I'd hired 8 years ago, the new guy doesn't know about the Q4 carrier cap. We're going to get killed on rates in November. One from our compliance manager, Root Software's throwing errors on the Gulf Coast runs. IT can't figure it out. Zane told them to just manually override. One from a regional director I'd mentored for 6 years, I don't want to get involved, but they're making decisions that don't make any sense. 3 of our Southeast partners have stopped returning calls. I read them all. I didn't respond with anything useful. That wasn't coldness, it was clarity. My job wasn't to save the company anymore. My job was to be patient. Fletcher sent me a formal notice of license non-renewal in the 5th week. According to the terms of our agreement, my termination had triggered a 90-day wind-down period, after which the company would lose the right to operate the platform. The notice had already been sent to Harlan's general counsel. I found out later that the general counsel, the same one who'd approved the original agreement 4 years earlier, had apparently not retained memory of its terms. There had been staff turnover in the legal department. The person who reviewed it originally was gone. Zane's people had focused their due diligence on the severance paperwork, not the underlying contracts. That's the thing about experience. It lives in the details. The details are invisible until they're not. The call from Harlan came in week 7. He called my cell directly, which he hadn't done in months. I let it ring through the first time. He called back an hour later. I answered. I think there's been a miscommunication, he said. I didn't say anything. The legal team is saying there's some kind of issue with the operations software. I'm sure we can work this out. I don't think there's been a miscommunication, I said. I think everything is working exactly as the contract specifies. A pause, then, what do you want? It's a strange thing, being asked that question after 18 years of giving what you had without being asked. I thought about the Saturday mornings. I thought about the vacation we canceled. I thought about sitting in my driveway on a Tuesday. I'll have Fletcher reach out to your counsel, I said. I think we can find something workable. I wasn't trying to burn the company down, I want to be honest about that. There were 400 people working there. Dispatchers, drivers, coordinators, warehouse staff. People who hadn't done anything wrong. My issue wasn't with them. So what I asked for wasn't destruction. It was fairness with a long memory. Through Fletcher, I proposed the following. A formal consulting agreement, 18 months, at a rate that reflected what it would have cost them to replace what I'd built from scratch. Rights to the platform would transfer fully at the end of the term, provided all payments were made. In exchange, I would support the transition, answer questions, and ensure operational continuity. Harlan's first response, relayed through counsel, was that my ask was unreasonable. Fletcher replied by attaching a logistics industry report estimating replacement costs for a custom route optimization system of comparable scope. The number was higher than what I'd asked for. The second response was a counteroffer. We went back and forth for 2 weeks. I didn't budge on the core number. I gave a little on the timeline. We signed on a Thursday morning. My wife made eggs that day. I don't know why I remember that specifically. Scrambled eggs with the sharp cheddar I like, and coffee that was actually hot for once because neither of us was rushing anywhere. We sat at the kitchen table and didn't talk much about the deal. We talked about finally booking that vacation. About calling our son, who was at college by then and didn't know the full shape of what had happened, only that his dad had left the company to do some consulting. I told her I wanted to tell him the real version someday, not to make him proud of me, or at least not only for that, but because I thought the lesson was worth knowing. That patience isn't passivity. That preparing for the worst isn't cynicism. That the quiet work you do when no one's watching is the only kind that lasts. She said I should call him that weekend. I did. The consulting engagement started 2 weeks later. I drove to the office on a Monday morning, the same building I'd walked out of 4 months earlier. Different badge, different title, entirely different terms. Zane was polite, professionally polite, the way people are when they know they got something wrong and would rather not name it out loud. I wasn't interested in rubbing anything in. I showed up, did the work, answered the questions, and kept to myself. There's a kind of freedom in that, I found. When you're not fighting for your position, when you're not trying to protect your title or your turf or your standing in the hierarchy, you can just focus on the thing itself, the work, the problem in front of you. It's almost peaceful. What I noticed over those 18 months was that the problems weren't really Zane's fault. He was smart enough, he was genuinely trying. What he didn't have, and what you can't get from an MBA program or 6 weeks of onboarding, was context. The kind of knowledge that comes from having been in the room when the Southeast carrier contracts were first negotiated, knowing which regional director needed a phone call versus an email, understanding that our Q4 rates depended on a relationship I'd built over a decade with a man in Memphis who only trusted people he'd had dinner with. That context lived in me. You can't download it. You can't restructure your way to it. You can only earn it, slowly, over years, and then watch it walk out the door in a manila folder if you're not careful. Somewhere around month 14, Harlan called me again. Not about operations this time. He called on a Sunday evening, which was unusual. His voice was different. Less the voice of the man with the silver cufflinks and more the voice of someone older, a little uncertain. He said he'd been thinking about how it had all gone. He didn't apologize exactly. Harlan wasn't built for exact apologies. But he said something that I've turned over in my mind a few times since. He said, I thought I was building something for the future. I didn't think about what I was tearing down. I didn't have a ready answer for that. I said something about how those things can look the same from a distance. He asked if I thought Zane could get there eventually. I told him, honestly, yes. Given time and the right mentorship, yes. The kid wasn't the problem. The problem was the assumption that experience could be replaced by enthusiasm, that what I carried in my head was somehow less valuable than what Zane carried in his degree. That assumption is everywhere. I've seen it in every industry, in every city, at every level. Companies shed their institutional memory like it's dead weight and then wonder why the wheels come off. They mistake familiarity with obsolescence. They confuse gray hair with irrelevance. I finished the consulting engagement on a Friday in March. The last day, I walked through the operations floor, said goodbye to the dispatchers and coordinators I'd worked with for years, and left my temporary badge at the front desk. Driving home, I wasn't angry. I hadn't been angry for a long time, I realized. Somewhere in the process, maybe in the driveway on that Tuesday, or in the conversation with Fletcher, or in the kitchen with my wife and the scrambled eggs, the anger had converted into something more useful, something with a longer shelf life. I'd already started building something new by then. Small at first, just me and a former colleague I'd kept in touch with, working out of a shared office space in a suburb north of Columbus, route optimization consulting for mid-sized freight operators who couldn't afford enterprise systems. We had 4 clients when I left Harlan's company. By the end of that year, we had 19. People always want to know, did it feel like victory? Honestly, no. Not the way people imagine it does. It didn't feel like a movie ending. It felt quieter than that. More like the feeling after a long drive when you finally pull into your own driveway and sit there for a moment before going inside. What it felt like was that I finally understood something I'd been circling for a long time. All those years I'd spent saving someone else's company. The late nights, the canceled vacations, the Saturdays at my desk. I'd been building something. I just hadn't understood yet that the most valuable thing I was building wasn't in their system or on their servers. It was in me, The knowledge, the relationships, the judgment, none of that transferred when I handed in my badge. All of that was mine to begin with. My son flew home that Thanksgiving. He's 22 now, studying supply chain management, which, as far as family traditions go, I suppose I'll take. We spent most of the long weekend just talking. About his classes, about the business, about things that had nothing to do with any of it. At one point he asked me, out of nowhere, how I'd known to set up the platform licensing the way I had. I thought about it for a second. I didn't know it would matter, I told him. I just knew that what I built was mine. I never saw a reason to give that away. He nodded slowly, the way you do when something clicks into place. That seems like the right instinct, he said. I told him it was the kind of instinct you develop the hard way, through years of learning what gets taken when you're not paying attention. But once you have it, nobody can restructure it out of you. The gray wolves of the logistics world know something. The new alphas haven't learned yet. Experience doesn't show up on a resume line. It shows up at 2 in the morning when the Gulf Coast system goes down, and someone needs to know which number to call. Take that away, and you don't get fresh thinking. You get expensive confusion. And eventually, if you've been patient enough, you get to watch that confusion become clarity. Just not for them. I still think about that Tuesday afternoon in the driveway. Not with bitterness, that passed a long time ago, but with the kind of clarity you only get when enough time has gone by and you can finally see the whole shape of what happened. What happened to me wasn't random. I know that now. Every choice I made in the years before that folder landed on the table, building the platform on my own time, insisting on the licensing terms, staying quiet when I could have made noise. Those weren't lucky accidents. They were the result of something I'd been developing slowly, without ever naming it, over 18 years of hard work. The first thing was integrity. I don't mean integrity in the bumper sticker sense. I mean the practical kind. The kind where you do the right thing even when nobody's watching, even when the person who'd benefit from your corner cutting would never find out. I built that software platform honestly with my own time and my own equipment because that was the right way to do it. Not because I was planning for a rainy day, just because it was right. And when the rain did come, that integrity turned out to be the only shelter I had. The second thing was judgment. And judgment I've come to believe is just intelligence that's been seasoned by experience. Harlan had smart people around him. Zane was genuinely intelligent, but intelligence without context is like a map without terrain. It looks right until you're standing in a ditch. The ability to read a situation, to know which relationships needed a phone call and which needed silence. To understand that the Q4 carrier rates were tied to a handshake with a man in Memphis who didn't do business by email. That's not something you learn in a classroom. It accumulates. It lives in you. And when they terminated me, they couldn't terminate that. The third thing, the one I'm most grateful for, and the hardest to talk about without sounding like I'm bragging, was the willingness to hold on. To not break under the pressure of uncertainty. There were weeks in there when I didn't know how it was going to go. My attorney was cautious. The money wasn't infinite. My wife was working and we weren't struggling, but the question mark was real, and I could have grabbed the severance and signed the agreement and gone quiet. A lot of people do. There's no shame in it. But something in me said, wait. Be patient. The ground you're standing on is solid. Trust the work you did. That's the thing about what Harlan set in motion when he slid that folder across the table. He didn't just create a problem for himself. He revealed something about what I'd actually built, about where the real value was sitting, about what happens when you confuse a person with their title. He thought he was restructuring his company. He was actually teaching me what I was worth. I don't know if he ever fully understood the lesson from his side. Our last real conversation was that Sunday phone call, and it was honest but incomplete, the way most honest conversations are. What I know is that I understood it, and when my son asked me that Thanksgiving how I'd known to protect the platform the way I did, what I wanted to say, but maybe said less clearly than I'm saying it now, is that I didn't protect it because I saw the betrayal coming. I protected it because I believed in what I'd built. That belief, it turns out, was the whole thing. Everything else followed from it.